communication challenges. So, obviously, we can look at a lot of things when it comes to this topic, and it's definitely not simple. A big part, and again, I'm going to tie in astrology in these things because it is the easiest way I know of to describe and categorize different styles of communication. So, one place you'll see it for sure is the third house. This is a big part of your chart, your life, and how you communicate the things that you think about, the things that you experience, your intellect, your point of view, all these kinds of things will live in this house. And so whatever sign or signs you have in there will give you a pretty good idea of how you go about communication in your life. If you have a sign that's not really oriented towards open or fluid communication, so this specifically, Gemini and Virgo, if you don't have one of these two signs in the third house, it doesn't mean you're a bad communicator. It just means that you're going to communicate in a way that's different to the way that Mercury wants to communicate. So, for instance, if you have a water sign in here, it's going to be through an emotional lens. And again, depending on the water sign and how that shows up. If it's an earth sign, you're probably going to be a bit more practical. You'll probably like to take your time a little bit more. I mean, I know Virgo is an earth sign, but you know what I mean? Because it's ruled by Mercury, it's kind of a mix of both intellect and practicality, which is an interesting mix. With fire, it's going to be more passionate with the way that you communicate. And with air, more intellectual. Again, air signs are also going to be very comfortable here because Mercury works with the intellect. It works with how you put thoughts together. So that's air signs. So, I mean, it's going to change depending on the air sign, of course. Some air signs it's easier and some it's harder. Some it's not as easy to be understood by different kinds of people. Also, what sign and what house your Mercury is in is also going to give you a good idea. But this is more directly how you communicate rather than like a part of your life. They kind of team up together because they're both Mercury oriented, but still. Also, the third house has other things, involved with it, like siblings and enemies that you may not be as aware of. It isn't hidden all like at the 12th house, but it's something where you pick up on people that maybe aren't in your best interest based on their communication style and whether that works for you or is complementary. Again, the more fixed base signs, they're going to be very fixed in their thinking. There isn't going to be much fluctuation. And when it comes to thoughts and ideas, that can be challenging. Again, if you're around people who think like you and are just as rigid, then it's fine. If you're more around flexible intellect people, it becomes more challenging because they will be open to possibilities and you won't. The other interesting part with this is that learning takes place when you're open to learning, when you're open to a new perspective. If you're closed and you think it's all worked out, you can miss out on opportunities. Now, that doesn't mean that a person who has a fixed sign in here won't be able to communicate. They can. It's just, it has to be with people who either they, like I said, have the same kind of approach to intellect, or they're flexible enough to meet that person where they're at. But I don't know. It's not, in most circles, in most concepts, it's not a good thing to be too fixed on your thinking, because when you decide that this is how it is, even if it could be in a lot of ways, you miss out on new possibilities. And that's where you stop learning. So again, there's challenges on all sides. Mutable signs are flexible, yes, and that's good to be open to new concepts, but it means it might be a little bit flaky too. You know, they might abandon ideas quicker. And again, it depends on what we're talking about as to whether this is good or not. It also depends on the actual intelligence or the intellect or the other, you know, your and the other person's life experience. So I don't even mean age. Some people are older and still haven't worked out life experience that well. It can also be that, maybe there's some cognitive decline or whatever. So, there's some interesting variables that come into play. It could be that that person hasn't experienced something that you have, so they can't understand your point of view. And that's where communication gets really, really tricky. So if you've been raised in a certain environment, and that's just the way things were for you growing up, it could be difficult to expand or understand another point of view. Especially if there's like trauma and like sort of walls built up around those ideas. This is where it can get interesting. It's no wonder communication can be challenging between people. It's no wonder people can get, offended or feel mocked or made fun of or whatever. Obviously, I see it online all the time. I don't personally like it, if I'm being honest. I don't like mockery. And even if somebody doesn't understand your point of view and they don't see your point of view, it doesn't mean they deserve to be mocked, because there's different points of view. Even if it's something you strongly disagree with, it doesn't mean it's okay to mock somebody else for having that. So that's where things can get tricky, and I think that the insults fly too easily sometimes in these situations. But again, it can show, mockery can show either like a lack of awareness or a lack of intelligence, a lack of empathy. There's a few things that can show up there. And there's different kinds of intelligences also. That's the whole point. We're all here for different reasons, different purposes, and we all contribute in different ways. But to think that we know everything, to think that we are able to connect or communicate with everybody, I suppose you can, but on that sort of deeper level, some people are not as deep as others. And again, it could be in different areas. They could be deep in one area, not in another. Also, we got to take into account certain mental states or whatever, Obviously, I think we have to bring into the conversation how many self-destructive things does a person partake in, how many chemical sort of imbalances could be created based on these chemical compounds that people partake in. All of this stuff can lead to the difficulty of communication between people. And then, there's a lot of people who have deep insecurities. So if a person can't even really come to terms with themselves inside and be comfortable in their own company, and how are you then meant to form a relationship with somebody else? And I know that probably sounds weird, because you people sort of think talking to yourself is crazy, right? Again, it depends on the conversation, doesn't it? If you're trying to work out your thoughts and the course of action and whatever, I've heard from some in some school of thoughts believe that people who, discuss things, not believing there's another person there, but people who discuss their thoughts and feelings, that can be a sign of intelligence also. But again, in social circles, this could be seen as something kind of crazy. So it just goes to show, and again, intelligence is always what's going to come back to the fold. How connected are you to your cognitive abilities? Do you have a healthy brain? Do you have a healthy prefrontal cortex? Is it fully developed? What types of things do you do in your lifestyle with your thoughts and whatever to contribute to a healthy body and healthy brain? So again, these are just some of the factors. I'm sure there'd be a lot more. I mean, I definitely went through a few, but all of these things wrapped up show why communication can be challenging between human beings. And then, of course, you can bring then the political and the religious, spiritual, whatever sort of avenue you want to consider. Are you open-minded in those areas, or are you closed? Are you fixed? And again, when it comes to religion, in most cases, the baseline of that is the fear of death, the fear of someone's own mortality and what happens afterwards. Like when you think about the baseline of what religion really consists of, I mean, it does it in a kind of a weird, in my opinion, in kind of a weird, controlling, manipulative sort of way. But at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, is this idea of do these things, and then you have nothing to fear in the next life, or, whatever it is, that heaven, hell, whatever. So that's how people can, take hold of you. What are your fears? What types of things are you irrationally afraid of? Because if that's the case, that's the doorway in. And fear is the easiest to control people with, and it's the hardest to overcome once people are in a fearful state. Which, of course, explains why religion has continued for so long, even though it's incredibly outdated. Now, I only bring this up in terms of communication because it creates communication breakdown. What it does is it teaches a person to listen to like a scripture or a story or whatever, rather than their own personal truth. And if that's the case, it doesn't matter then what the other person has to say. If it goes against the scripture, then that person is canceled. So once again, that causes a communication breakdown. You can't really communicate with someone if their entire philosophy of communication, thoughts, intellect, whatever, is related to an outdated construct designed to control people and make them easy to manipulate. So all of these factors come into play. Like I said, it's no wonder it can be difficult for human beings to communicate with each other. And I didn't even go into the age factor, the maturity level. I mean, I touched a little bit on it. I mean, at the end of the day, if your prefrontal cortex isn't developed, if you're a female, it's 25. If you're a male, 30. So any age under that, and your brain hasn't even fully developed yet. Afterwards, again, it depends on how self-destructive you are, what sort of things you partake in, as to the decline of that. There's all kinds of mental and brain disorders and diseases, and these things can straight up attack the brain and body. So it becomes very difficult then to make sound arguments. And again, there's little things like alcohol is a really interesting one. When you speak to someone who when they're drunk, right, in the act of, don't they just repeat themselves over and over again? You sit there listening and you're like, yeah, we had this conversation 2 seconds ago. You said the same thing. Everybody knows that. And then there can be like a switch. It's either, oh, I love you, like, this sort of stuff, to switching to getting angry and, losing your shit. But that's during. How about the whole come down thing? Because it stays in your system for years, by the way. Let's talk about that. People who have been drinking for prolonged periods, now I don't know if you've had time to see this, but I know I have. They tend to get stuck in a time period, right? They get stuck in a time where they were having fun, right? They were partying, they were drinking a lot. maybe it was when they were younger. I noticed that's a lot with people who have been drinking for many years. They think about those glory days, and they look at them with rose-colored glasses, because everything past that point, that's when they got really hooked on alcohol, they don't really remember. So they only have these memories of before they were drinking all the time. It may have been the start, so they could have been drinking. But, after years and years of this, it pickles your brain. So you're not really making great connections, and then you're delusional and fantasizing about the past. The life, lamenting the life that you gave up for this drug. This is what I'm talking about. Now, communication is a big, big topic. I thought I would bring up a few, and I might go deeper into some. But yeah, if you don't have great communication skills, and you can't see different points of view, and you aren't open to these things, it makes communication very difficult. And you'll be only, able to discuss things with a certain group of people. The more open you are, the more open to suggestion, the more curious you are, the easier it is for you to learn, the easier it is for you to have a back and forth communication. Once again, it becomes easier when you have, in terms of astrology, when you have signs that are compatible in the areas of communication in your chart. Anyway, I hope that was something to sort of chew on. And of course, I'll make videos again.